Good morning and welcome to Monday Mornings with Margie. I'm happy to be here, and I am really happy to have two special guests with me today, and I will let them go ahead and introduce themselves.
Great. Thanks for having us, Margie. I'm David Crowley, and I am president and founder of a nonprofit organization called Social Capital Inc. And I know we'll get to talk more about what that's about momentarily, but I'll let Sophie do her intro first.
I'm Sophie Ichizawa. I'm a Americorp member for Social Capital Inc. I started in January, and I guess the volunteer outreach coordinator for it.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. And as we were speaking a little bit about before we came on, that I went to your website and I have a little bit of insight into what you do, but I'm really looking forward to hearing exactly what your organization does. I know you're the founder, and so I'm just looking forward to hearing exactly what you all are doing, because it seems like pretty amazing work.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I can give a little bit of an overview. So Social Capital Inc., or SCI for short, our goal is to get people more connected to their neighbors and bring diverse people in our communities together to strengthen the community and to address pressing problems that we see together. And I know the thing that prompted us to be here on your show this morning is a recent vigil we did. But I think maybe before we get into that, Sophie and I can give a little more of an overview of some of the stuff we do. We're not responding to an imminent crisis. So again, like I said, in terms of that general goal of bringing people together to get stronger communities, we do that in several different ways. One big focus of our work is around youth leadership. So the idea of engaging young people at a young age and identifying issues they see and ways that they can address them. For a long time, with one of our very first programs when we founded the organization in 2002 that continues today is a youth council leadership program, where the idea is to really empower young people to see what's something that they see as a problem in the community, and then to develop skills to address those problems. And actually, we're just launching a new program. One example that's speaking a little bit broadly to the mental health field that you're in is we were in a program sort of looking at ways we could support youth mental health. And we came up with the idea of taking our general idea of getting youth to take the lead on things, to actually getting them to take the lead on mental health issues that they see their peers facing. So I think as we speak, we actually have teams of young people working on projects to address mental health needs of their peers, sort of coached by local community volunteers. People have experience with like project development and presentations. And later this month, they're going to sort of make a pitch, sort of like the people do when they're starting up a business, like on Shark Tank or something, except young people are going to have project ideas for ways they can address mental health issues. So that's one example of something we do. And one more example I'll give to illustrate the point before letting Sophie speak a little is just to speak, one of the things that we're about is, we were talking before you hit record about how, it's been a tough year, and, signs of hope, sometimes are hard to find. But I think one of the things that's heartened me is to see how our general idea of getting people more civically active has been really resonated all the more during this difficult time with people. And one great example of that is we've for a long time had a network of volunteers that would help seniors who are living at home with things like raking in the fall and shoveling in the winter. That network turned out to be a great resource when, COVID hit, and especially before, in the early goings, the stores didn't have those senior shopping hours and stuff. So we had a network of volunteers who would, sort of quickly with a Facebook post saying, hey, Mrs. Jones needs grocery shopping. And people would be literally like, within 5 minutes, you'd have 6 volunteers ready to go out to Market Basket for them. So an example to say, one way I would sum it up is, we were started actually to try to address a declining sense of community and a declining sense of knowing our neighbors. And so to some extent, we are an organization to put in place those kind of connections that maybe in times past might have happened a little more organically. But one of the big ways we carry out our mission is through being part of the Americorp National Service Program, which is sometimes likened to being like a domestic Peace Corps, founded in 1994. And Sophie is one of our newest Americorp members, but has jumped right in doing a lot. So I'll let her talk a little bit more about some of the things she's involved with.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I guess one of the biggest programs I've been involved with right now is our Woburn Parent Network, and that's sort of a new SCI program that we've started, and we have like monthly parent support forums to, I guess, give resources to parents and have them come together and create like a space where they can discuss challenges and come up with like solution-oriented ideas. So that's been, we're like trying to help parents like improve their mental health during this time because it's such like a crazy time right now. Yeah, and so that's a big thing that I've been doing. I guess we've also been planning World Fest, which is a festival that we have annually where we celebrate like various cultures in our community. And yeah, I guess we're trying to bring awareness to the injustices that these groups face.
Mm-hmm. Now, what communities do you all serve?
Sure, great question. So we started in my hometown of Woburn, and that's where our headquarter office is. But when we do return to an office at some point, that's where we'll go. And we still have a big presence. So a lot of our deepest work is in the Woburn area, but we really do serve the greater Boston area. So Sophie has counterparts that serve in different Boston neighborhoods. So we have like AmeriCorp members in the Fenway neighborhood. I don't know if they might be able to slip in, see opening day if the weather's better tomorrow. We have a lot of members in Dorchester. We also serve the community of Lynn, Chelsea, and a number of other communities in the greater Boston area.
Wow. And I guess one question I'm curious about, Sophie, is what made you, this is kind of separate, but what made you decide you wanted to do Americorp?
Yeah, so I studied sociology in college, and that made me really interested in like going into a nonprofit and helping people, and just really passionate about social justice. And I found this organization, and it just seemed like they were really interested in, you know, making a more equitable community in Woburn. So that's sort of why I decided to join.
Awesome. Awesome. So another question I was thinking about is, so how do you reach people? Like what platforms do you use as an organization? Because the concept of what you're talking about is like amazing, but I could foresee being an operations person, like how do you take like this amazing idea and then, you know, get it operationalized in a way that you can see the progress you're looking for? So I was just curious on what are some of the tactics you use or ways you connect to the community and then help the community to connect with each other?
Yeah, sure. A couple things we do. One thing is we really think about building a network of both individuals who are interested in making a difference and also organizations that are sort of serving different aspects of community needs, and kind of try to knit those together. So some of it, and we can talk more about specific, you know, technology platforms, but overarching is that sort of idea of bringing diverse people and organizations together. And I know we're going to talk probably more about the vigil that we planned, but a sort of a platform, if you will, for that was after, you know, quickly after we went into the pandemic mode in Woburn, we created with a few partners something called the Woburn Mutual Aid Network. And what we were doing in the early days of the pandemic, we had weekly Zoom calls with, it would be, you know, sometimes a couple dozen individuals and organizations ranging from, you know, Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, the local food pantry, as well as sometimes the mayor would jump on or somebody from his office, you know, state rep, and that kind of thing, just kind of really so that we could coordinate our response. So those, and we were able to do that because I think, and actually there's a lot of research that shows the ability for a community to respond to a crisis, a community that has those strong ties going into it, both sort of at a formal and informal and neighborhoods level, does much better. And we really proved that case in point, I think, by having that kind of network that we were able to build upon. But maybe Sophie, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more some of the specifics you spend a lot of your time posting, and what some people might first think of when you think of like a social network, and that's definitely been a big part of it.
Definitely. Yeah, we have a few social media pages, actually, 2 Facebook pages and 2 Twitter pages. And one is more for like the SCI Woburn, more community focused in Woburn, and then the other one is more for like an Americorp focused page, I guess, and to reach those that community. And yeah, I guess I can link the links in the chat or something, but that is something that we do. We also have Serve, which is also another Facebook page where we get volunteers and we ask for help when seniors need it.
Oh, that's great.
I think one of the general concepts too, just being, it's the idea of, when I started the organization, I remember seeing there was a League of Women Voters study that said roughly half of the American population would like to be more involved in their local community. And sometimes people would talk about like, oh, how are you going to get people really, apathetic involved? And I said, well, there's a big, I sort of speculate, and I think I've seen it's true. There are a lot of people that sort of, their instinct is they would like to get more involved. They would like to give more. They would like to help their neighbors, but they need that, as to use your term, that platform for doing it. I think a lot of what we've been trying to do over the years is build up that connectivity, both, through programs that we run, but then also trying to be smart about adapting to technology as we go, whether it's the Facebook group, or we also did a big food drive to address food security that we ran, and kind of people were able to text in that they had a donation out at their doorstep, and then a volunteer would go get it. So kind of try to be pretty creative, I guess.
Yeah, I think what I find, and I think it's even more so during COVID, is like, I feel like people have just kind of gone into their little shells, and we're all starting to come out. But I think sometimes you have to literally reach into the home and give people specific things that they can do or be part of. And you're right, they are looking for those things, but they're not, they do better when it's sort of brought to them, and then they'll jump on board. And so that was one of the things I was curious about, is like, how do you engage the community? Because there's a lot of people that want to do it, but either don't feel like they have enough time, don't have the energy. And then obviously with COVID, people being stuck in their homes more, and everything being on screen, like there's a lot of ways that, I could foresee it being more difficult. So I wanted to talk a little bit now about the recent vigil that you all held and were part of developing within, it was within the Woburn community that you actually did it, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So if you want to tell me a little bit about how that was created, what the thinking was, and then I wasn't there, and so I'd love to hear sort of what the focus was and how it went.
Sure. I can start out on that. So one backdrop to that is that, I've used the term, and I think Sophie and I both use the term diversity, or celebrating different cultures, has always been part of our work. And I think in the past year in particular, to some extent the past several years, we've been doing a lot of things. We helped create a group called Woburn Unites that was looking at really trying to have people in our communities feel as welcome and included as possible, when sometimes the national rhetoric has been not so much in that direction over in recent years. So we have been, prior to getting into this vigil, doing other kinds of programs, trying to show support for diverse cultures, sometimes more educational, sometimes more getting deeper into social justice issues. So like in February for Black History Month, we had some educational video film screenings followed by discussions. And we also partnered with another group on a program called Disrupting Racism, kind of getting people to look at ways they can address racism in their own lives. And so that was a little bit of a backdrop. So we've always kind of been working with people on that sort of racial justice and inclusion topic. This was, and we had actually done a couple of years ago, we did organize a big vigil after some police brutality, in response to that, not in our community, but just at the national level. So we had experience with that, but this was, I think, like a lot of organizations, maybe we hadn't focused as much as a topic on the Asian American discrimination that the community faces, but obviously the recent events definitely brought that to the forefront. So we worked with, again, it was existing group relationships we had, and kind of put forth, we started talking initially at a staff meeting just internally about our feelings after the murders in Atlanta. And we just had this feeling we wanted to do something. We said, hey, let's bring it to our group of community partners. And very quickly, all of a sudden, we were in charge of a vigil coming together. And yeah, so I don't know if you want to describe a little bit more about the event, Sophie, the event itself that we put together.
Yeah, it was, I think, like over 100 people showed up. It was really great to see everyone come and support the Asian American community and the AAPI community. I know we had some incredible speakers. I spoke, I guess, and it was a really incredible experience just to get, I don't know, my voice heard and other minority voices heard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it was primarily speakers sort of on issues of hate and violence towards the the AAPI community was the focus.
Yeah, that was basically the focus. I think we were just trying to lift up voices from the AAPI community. So we were able to do that, and then also just have allies speak on their experiences. And yeah.
In fact, one of the very first, we had the mayor spoke, he's not Asian American, but, so we had some elected officials, but prior to, one of the first speakers, I was pretty excited to have that there's a local Black church called St. John's Baptist Church, and they were very quick to jump on this. And you could kind of see, I think they appreciated the way community had kind of rallied around them, like around George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests of last summer. And they very quickly wanted to say, okay, now we have the back of this community kind of thing. So one of our first speakers was somebody representing that church. He led the moment of silence for the victims. And then there was a section, a big section, probably the main section was, as Sophie said, lifting up community members of the AAPI community locally and having them speak. And one thing that's pretty cool is there were a lot of young, both voices on the program. Sophie wasn't the youngest. There was an 8th grader spoke, which I was very impressed with. But there also just a lot of youth came to support as well, which I thought was very exciting to see, because obviously if you want to change this over time, that's certainly seeing youth. Sophie, I would think almost half, we'd say maybe half the crowd was probably either teen or young adult. Yeah,
there were a lot of youth there. And we also had anonymous quotes that came in. We asked for submissions, either about racism against the AAPI community or about how to combat racism. And we got a couple of quotes, but we're still taking some. So
nice. Nice.
Because I think one thing we wanted to see is having an event like this, when we try to do things like this, sometimes you do a public event can get attention to something, but you don't want it to be a one-time thing. So that, we tend to think, okay, let's do a great event, get people thinking, get people engaged, but then have some follow-up opportunities. And so, like Sophie said, people can continue submitting comments and, we'll continue sharing them. And we have a follow-up meeting to think about ways, we can continue the conversation and to support and educate folks.
That's great. That's great. So Sophie, I was curious if you were willing to share some of what you said or all of what you said, you know, whatever pieces of what you said, I'm interested to hear more about that.
Definitely. So I guess my speech was on, I guess, not really learning about how Asian Americans were treated in the past and the history behind that with internment camps and immigrants. And I guess that was something that, you know, I'm still reflecting on and I'm still learning about, because there hasn't really been spaces where I feel like Asian Americans can speak up. And I think that a lot of times we're scared to take up space of other marginalized groups. But yeah, I guess that was one of my main points. And something else that I think is important is to not forget about, you know, the other marginalized groups that we've been fighting for, and that we are all, you know, fighting the same system of oppression. So
Mhm. That's great. That's great. Yeah, I think it's interesting. You know, I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community, and I think what's interesting when we look at history is who wrote the books, who told the story, where did our history books come from, and I think we're seeing changes with that. But I think there's a lot of things that we were all taught about the different communities or not taught. um, and things we were taught that were not accurate or weren't told in its entirety. And so I think that one of the things that I think about, and interested to get either of your input on this, is that a lot of times when we see these issues come to a head, and in the last year, what's happened in particular with the Black community and with the AAPI community, it's existed before. And so I think in particular, we know more and we see more of what's happened in the Black community, but people don't talk as much, like you were saying, about the Asian American community and its history in America, and the things that people have gone through even before COVID. But I think COVID has unleashed, and the politics of the country have unleashed a lot of things that I think many people didn't know were actually happening.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess going off of that, there is this like idea of the model minority and a myth of that. And I think that also affects like, oh, no, there's not as much racism against Asian Americans, and also it creates a divide between, you know, people of color.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really important. And then I think that also within the Asian American community, there's lots of, you know, it's not like one group per se, you know, there's lots of different ethnicities. And I think that also often happens within minority communities is people don't realize how much diversity exists within the communities. And so all those things I think are critical to understanding this and moving forward. But I guess I'm inspired to know that, you know, the Black church in your community was so willing to come out and support this, because I think that's what this is really about. I think it's about, you know, the oppressed groups and non-oppressed groups coming together, people who are willing to do that, to be part of this, coming together to support each other. Because that's what's going to change things, is when everybody can stand together. And then when you can have allies who are willing to come and speak out as well. So I guess one other question I have related to this topic is, what were there people who spoke about, and you said allies, but people who spoke about like how you can help, what can you do? Either if you witness something or just globally, you're sitting watching the news and you see these things come over the news and maybe it's not in your community, but you see it and you feel helpless and you want to do something. Were there things that specifically came out of this vigil that people shared? That's for either of you.
Yeah, I was trying to see, it looked like you were ready to say something, so fair, you're thinking about it.
I can speak on this, either one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my first thought is, I think on this topic, in part because it, at least for a lot of the non-Asian American community, I think that this was so maybe not on people's radar so much, for some of the reasons Sophie said, this perceived model minority myth kind of thing, among others. Maybe that it was such a new topic that I think it was largely more focused on education more than like, action steps. I think the biggest action step that I took away, and I think we're taking away, is like, let's continue the conversation as we, like you were saying, Margie, like when you think about the way different oppressed groups need to come together, and it is part of this bigger story of, oppression or white supremacy, to use that term, and that there's this broader theme, and making sure that the Asian American discrimination and racism issues are, folded into that broader activism, maybe.
Right. Right.
I think with the education, I think that is really important right now. I think that is, doing something just to educate yourself on the history of racism and how that intertwines today.
Absolutely.
And you use the term, Sophie, like, and I think that's been part of our theme, and one of our colleagues, Phil, who's one of our team leaders on our team, he's African-American, and I know he's emphasized a lot this, really lifting up voices theme, and that's something we've been trying to be mindful of, and I think, and that in and of itself, I think has power too, because I know as a white male, the only way I can, I have the privilege of not having to worry about, what happens if the police stop me and that kind of thing. The only way I can understand and begin to even begin to comprehend what it's like is hearing the voices of, Black friends who tell me, how, about having the talk. And similarly, I think with the AAPI community, it's only by hearing somebody like Sophie share, where she's coming from that I can learn. It's great to read books and stuff, but there's nothing like kind of really hearing someone's voice, authentic voice of experience.
Absolutely. The putting a human face and human experience, to the story, I think is how we educate, and I think how we make change. So, and it's interesting too, this is not to segue away from this, but I recently did an interview with a woman who's a therapist and also Native American, and does a lot of work with the Native American community. And when we were done recording and she and I were speaking, part of what we spoke about was how in a lot of ways the Native American community feels like the invisible minority. And so it's a very interesting thing. And I think the less divided the different groups feel and more like one, the more empowered people will be. If we continue to be divided amongst oppressed groups, then it's going to be harder to channel our power as a group and our voices as a group, because the thread is similar amongst all groups, with very different twists and turns, obviously, for each group. But the more, people of different groups can understand each other's pain and work together, the better it's going to be for all these groups and then for future generations to come. So I think I'm inspired to know there were so many young people there, because I agree that's where our focus needs to be, is on the younger generations like Sophie, like Sophie's generation, to bring this to the forefront and make change. So someone said, I recently heard someone say something like, we don't only want to be invited to the party, we want to be asked to dance. And I just thought that was interesting. So it's not even just about having a seat at the table. Like a seat at the table is great, but then your voice needs to be part of the discussion, and your story and your input and your perspective needs to be part of the story as well. So
Okay.
That makes sense.
great. Well, thank you both for coming and sharing the amazing work that you all are doing and sharing about the vigil that you had. I appreciate you taking the time out to come speak with me about that. And we have a site through Achieve in Woburn, so maybe we can find other ways of connecting, separately, but we could talk about that another time. But thank you very much for being with me. And thank you to the listeners and viewers. I hope that you all have a great week, and take care.